Dr. Davis.
All right, folks. Well, welcome everyone. I see we've got quite a bit of folks here today, and I am very excited, as I think I speak for the rest of my colleagues, very excited to have all of you here today for what is our final ARE STEM and CTE in the middle grades partner meeting. And we've got a really jam-packed agenda. We're going to take the next couple hours to really make sure everyone gets an opportunity to hear about what we've been up to during the planning grant for the past year. So I'm going to ask Kathleen if she can go ahead and put up the presentation. We are actually just going to take a couple of minutes, and I'm going to do something we call a chat storm. Normally, if you've been to these meetings, you know we like to take the first few minutes to just check in with one another. A huge part of this work, the collaborative change work, is really about how we build community. Another part of it is also how we talk about music, apparently. But
you got it.
But what I'd like to do is just take a minute to ask each of you, on the count of 3, you can move on to the next slide, Kathleen. Ask you to share a little bit about yourself. So on the count of 3, you're going to type in the chat the name of your organization, your own name, where you're located. And given that all of this work about building educational equity in STEM and CTE is really about community building, as well as collaboration, we want to know, what is a recent celebration or accomplishment that has happened as a result of collaboration in your life? And this can be something related to your work with students, your work with community and families, and it can also be related to work around collaboration with peers. So again, this is the chat storm. Hopefully you're typing away right now. And when I count to 3, you can go ahead and press enter. We're going to see all the responses. So 3, 2, 1, go ahead and enter. We've got folks from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Jennifer, I see you're here. Tracy Howard from the governor's office in Nevada. Thank you. Our partners from the Citadel, Ashley Conrad, and my colleague Kathleen Fitzpatrick, both were my colleagues from NAEP. Thank you both for being here. And we've also got a lot of partners all the way out in Seattle, Ginger and Tammy. I think one of the things I appreciate about looking at all of this is the number of partners that we've been able to bring together for this really important work. And also your consistent investment in this work, looking at the numbers, but also looking at the quality of the folks that have been a significant part of this collaboration, and without whom we couldn't have gotten to where we are today. So thank you all very much for sharing all of that. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into what we are going to accomplish for today, and do my very best to give you a broad overview so that we really can spend most of the time listening to the updates from the work groups. So our goals for today are that we're going to share what we've accomplished during the planning grant period, which for those of you that are just joining us for the first time, started last December. We're also going to present the culmination of all of the work. And if you've been closely involved with the work groups over the past couple of months, they've been working incredibly hard to help us shape this alliance proposal. And then lastly, we are going to leave some room for questions about the structure, partnership, and anything else related to what we present about the alliance proposal. Now, in lieu of allowing folks to unmute and ask questions and provide feedback in real time, because we are limited on time, what I'm going to do is after I go over the agenda, Kathleen's going to share a Jamboard link, and we can move on to the agenda, Kathleen. She's going to share a Jamboard link where you will be able to provide your feedback throughout the presentation. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those 3 options are for feedback. So today we're going to go over the planning grant timeline and the highlights, allow each of the work groups to really share with you what they've been working on over the past few months. And then we're going to wrap things up with where we are right now with the Alliance proposal, including the goal, the structures, partnerships, and oops, Kathleen, I think one of your screens moved in there, thanks. And then talk about next steps, which will ultimately be the proposal that's due on January 25th. So I am going to go ahead and ask Kathleen if you can put the Jamboard link in the chat. And I want to give everyone an opportunity to just make sure they can get in there. In the chat, you're going to see a Jamboard with 3 slides. And the 3 slides are going to give you an opportunity to share what is resonating for you about the Alliance proposal. Where do you still have some questions? And then lastly, what might be some recommendations or barriers that you think we need to be considering as we put the finishing touches on the Alliance proposal? Do we have the Jamboard link?
No, not yet.
Oh,
sorry. When I had to share my screen, all of my other links went away. So it's taken me a minute to.
No worries, no worries. If nothing else we've learned over the past couple of years is flexibility. So I think we're okay.
So Sylvia, I'm going to have to unshare my screen in order to.
It's okay. We can share it in a minute if you want to move forward, because there'll be a chance to do that. Oh, thanks, Ginger. All right. Teamwork makes the dream work. All right. I don't know if you saw that, Kathleen, but Ginger shared it. So
thanks, Ginger.
Can everyone access the Jamboard? Just want to make sure everyone can get in there. I'm seeing some heads nod. Okay, thumbs up, awesome. Okay, great. So again, throughout the presentation, we definitely want your feedback. What's resonating, where do you have questions, and any recommendations for the Alliance proposal. Okay, Kathleen, we can move on. All right, so as you will recall, last December, we received the planning grant from NSF, specifically through NSF Includes, right? And so NSF Includes is really looking to improve collaborative efforts that are aimed at broadening participation, specifically for underserved students in STEM. And we broaden that because we understand the strong relationship between STEM and CTE. So we added special populations, which are specifically outlined in Perkins 5. And we came up with We Are STEM and CTE in the middle grades, which is actually Workforce and Education Alliance for Realizing Equity in STEM and CTE. We felt very strongly that what we needed to do with this planning grant is spend this year thinking about what it would look like to build a proposal for a national collective impact alliance of education partners that are committed to systems level change that's going to create the culture of success for girls, BIPOC, and special populations in STEM education and CTE. And so you may recall also that we had some incredible co-PIs, have some incredible co-PIs all over the country. Carolyn Zachary from the California Department of Education, Angel Malone from the South Carolina Department of Education, Tammy Getz from the Utah STEM Action Center, and William Sprankles from Butler Tech of Ohio. And all of them will be sharing again today the culmination of the work groups that they have led. And so as we came together and started to develop a plan for this alliance. We opted to use the collective impact model for collaborative change. So you may recall that collective impact is really rooted in these 5 conditions. A collaborative effort for systems change that has a shared vision or a common agenda, that is committed to mutually reinforcing activities, that has a shared measures of success and systems for looking at those measures, that is also paying close attention to how you continuously communicate in order to make sure that everyone is moving in the same direction. And all of this is ultimately supported by or driven by the backbone organization, which allows the efforts to really be coordinated, no matter who is working on what work group. So we also modeled our work groups after the 5 conditions of collective impact. And then as we did this work, you can move on to the next slide. As we did this work, we recognize that it's really important when you're building collaboration to think about the different places where partners can provide input. So over the course of the past year, partners have been able to use a variety of methods to provide input, to participate in shared learning, and also to contribute in shaping what the Alliance proposal is going to look like. So we've had monthly steering committee meetings, over 6 partner group meetings, network convenings, and then different activities where we facilitated crowdsourcing. And the crowdsourcing often included asking the partners what were some best practices that they were seeing in the system around broadening participation for STEM and CTE, as well as what are the barriers and challenges that they're experiencing. And last but not least, we asked a lot about what you think we should be doing as we build a national collective impact alliance. Next. So here are some of the highlights about highlights for what we were able to accomplish over the past year. December and January, we really just started out thinking about what does our plan look like for implementation and communication. March through April, we really started to look at what are the work groups that need to come together, what are the charges of each of the work groups, how do we think about recruiting diverse individuals into each of those work groups so that we're really getting a very broad view of what the work should look like. April through June, we did quite a bit of crowdsourcing, again, through partner meetings, convenings, the network meetings. In May, we really talked about collective impact, again, making sure that we understand that this work isn't just about what we're able to do for the students, but this work, because it is systems level change work, is about how we're building capacity within the system and with all of the stakeholders to really understand how to plug into collective impact as a collaborative change model. In June and August, we spent quite a bit of time around synthesis, bringing in a lot of information, feedback from all of you, thinking about how we could also lean on what some of the research was saying around root causes and strategies for equity in STEM and CTE, and utilizing all of those different resources and points of feedback to think about what is our problem statement and start to draft a logic model. In September through pretty much last Friday, the work groups really leaned heavily on the work that we did within the logic models to start to dig into their own work and start to answer some of the questions that, again, were a part of their charge. And also went as far as to provide some feedback on some of the preliminary outcomes that we discussed in the summer. And then, of course, this month, what we're doing is putting all the final touches on the Alliance proposal, finalizing what the research and evaluation plans are going to look like. And then the last piece is the most tedious, which is making sure that we are coordinating and gathering all the different documents that we need from co-PIs and partners for the alliance proposal. So some of you may get a request for a letter of support, and then all of this ultimately will be completed and put into our alliance proposal, which is due January 25th at 5 p.m. How'd I do? Good. Okay, I'm seeing some smiles. Good. Putting an entire year's worth of work into what I think is about 10 minutes is a task. But I'm going to invite up the folks from the Mutually Reinforcing Activities Work Group, and we're going to move directly into sharing what each of the work groups accomplished.
Thanks.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I'm ready when you are.
Kathleen, can you move on to the next slide?
So we had an absolutely awesome group to work with. Angel Malone from the South Carolina Department of Education helped us spearhead it. We also had Scott, myself, Tom, Jenny, Christy, and Amanda. So we met on a number of occasions to try to hash stuff out and worked with several of the other groups to try to make sure that what we were coming up with meshed with goals and some of the other groups as measurements and some of the other groups as well. Next slide, please. So this was our charge, identifying partners' existing expertise and activities that can be shared, scaled, and supported through an alliance. We worked to start to develop what we would need for a plan of action to accomplish the work. As I said, including goals, activities, measurable objectives, and outcomes. So we kind of had to work with almost everybody to try to figure out what we were doing. Next slide, please. So our first question was around innovative strategies to identify broadening participation challenges and for our target populations. So we talked about coordinating workshops to do training specifically around helping our partners develop their own equity definition and adopt a framework for self-study and data analysis and implementation recommendations. That's our kind of overarching what we hope to get to. And then the plan in order to get there is coordinating and implementing the identified activities, such as the workshops, and then collecting data on them, such as attendance, the number of workshops we offer, the number of institutions, partners, or the number of partners that create their own equity definition, and then some other survey instruments and self-evaluation. Next slide, thank you. So our very first step, and some of you have already answered this, thank you. Our initial survey, I think we're probably going to have to do some more surveying before we get to where we need to go. But it's just to try to figure out where we are. So setting that baseline of expertise and experience before we start to figure out what needs work. So what the content of the workshops would be. And then we realized that two groups had different definitions for asset mapping, which was also extremely fascinating. So we were talking about asset mapping as figuring out what the expertise in the different regions were and who the partners were already partnering with as far as their collaborations. And then we outlined 4 steps to help us get to that goal that was on the previous slide. So that survey and potentially interviewing partners to determine if they have an equity definition right now, or any pieces, parts that could be leveraged to develop an equity definition, and then potential assets, developing a set of resources for partners around equity and systems change, and then developing that professional development and deploying it. And that was it. Thank you so much. And thank you to the group members. It was such a pleasure to work with all of you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate that. And now, Tammy, I think you're going to be up for a partnership, right?
Yep, I am ready. So the partnership work group, we had, much like Jennifer, an amazing team to work with that I've listed here. I know a few of our partners are here, Jeanette and Chris. I saw if there was anybody else that I missed, I apologize, but this was our amazing team that we worked with and met with on several occasions. Okay, next please. Okay, thank you. Our charge for the partnership working group was that we were supposed to help identify existing and proposed partners that would be important for bringing assets to the project that could help us build capacity, meet our outcomes successfully, and then to help kind of provide recommendations and guidance around what the structure of the partnerships roles would look like. And so one of the things I do before going on the next slide, want to preface is that the steering committee, some of you may remember, did do some brainstorming around partners, and so had created kind of a preliminary list of partners, right? And in that effort, they also created this list of partners with a structure around it for national, state or regional, and then local. And so that kind of framed our work building off of that. And so the first question we had are, what organizations are the proposed partners in the Alliance, and why are they important to address broadening participation challenges? And we kind of took that on. When I say broadening participation challenges, we really interpreted that as, how do we meet the outcomes that we're committing to? So we built a lot of what we did off of the logic model, which I think is a sustainable way to move forward, because that is our guidepost, right? So we integrated, we have now a spreadsheet that was created by the steering committee originally. And we spent some time thinking about partners that weren't present on that list. And so now we have integrated our ideas, our thoughts, recommendations into the existing partnership list that NAEP has. And we also recognize that there will be a lot of partners and partnerships we haven't identified that will be part of the scaling of the project if funded. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, as we probably all know already. We didn't really identify local partners, as in those individuals within a state, each individual state, that will be important to successfully accomplishing our outcomes. But those will definitely be a part of the scale up as well, as we shift to that portion of the project. I should say when funded. I'll be optimistic. How's that, Sylvia? And
Love
so then, and you'll see some redundancy, but I think the next question really goes to the structure of those partnerships. And the working group, we really, the local, state, regional, and national hierarchy felt comfortable, and it seemed like a great way to go. So we really stuck with that existing structure. It did, as we started playing around with kind of building out that list and thinking about other people, there may be, I think, and I haven't really talked to you, Sylvia, about this, but I do think that there could be some benefits to having kind of a second tier of categorization around, general roles that partners may play, such as in policy, if they exist within the higher education world, K-12, even community and cultural partners, government and industry. I think there may be benefits to having that second tier of structure overlay if we can do that. And then the next, so what mechanisms we use to structure the partnerships? So we created a matrix, and I have to say that we went through different iterations and kind of approaches to a matrix, and we landed on one that really identified what we called what I kind of took the liberty of doing this. So in my mind, they're attributes of a partner. And so those attributes really are about where they exist, what organization they exist in, what is their role, what is the responsibility in that role, what kind of relationships have they built out, and experiences and expertise in the collective impact model, for instance, in the role that they play in that organization. So those are really the attributes of a partner or partnering organization that align to the project. And so we built a matrix that really allows for potential partners to go in and say, yeah, I play a role in my organization that really does allow me to contribute in this particular outcome, to help contribute to this outcome, and the activities that will lead to those outcomes or support those outcomes. And so we think that the matrix, will help to align those attributes to outcomes. We think that it will also help to identify gaps in expertise that will be important. And then perhaps I think, and also serve as, maybe perhaps an MOU if we find that's useful in the project. And then I think also, I didn't put it in the slide, but as I look back through this again, Sylvia, it may be interesting to see if the matrix will probably lend itself to identifying standing or ad hoc committees that may be useful in the proposal. So then moving down to question 4, why is this set of partners the right set to undertake the collaborative activities? Again, I think it goes back to being able to align the attributes of a partner. I think also one of the things we did is I went in and I looked at some of the survey work from the mutually reinforcing activities committee. And I definitely think that, making sure that we use a kind of productive overlap or alignment to the survey responses will be important in that matrix. So there will definitely be some editing of the matrix that we might want to do. And then the next slide and last, what is the evidence that the partnership will be use a collaborative change framework, such as collective impact, to achieve the broadening participation goals of the Alliance? And again, it really goes back to making sure that the partners that have been identified will be identified, will have the experience, the expertise, be able to play the role, have all those attributes, and even better, if they've had some success with the use of collective impact in their efforts at the organization. It really goes back to making sure that we have a broad and deep bench for that work. And then, these all really kind of tie back to the matrix, really, to be able to communicate that we have the right partners that live, sit, breathe in the right space and have the right experience to come to the table. And I think what we might want to recognize is that some of these organizations may have, if they're, they may be able to contribute to just a single outcome. And that may be just as important perhaps in data analysis. That is a very important part of this project. If they can bring a strong set of skills and experience and play a role that allows them to contribute to data analysis, that's just as impactful as being able to contribute to across multiple outcomes, I think. And the other thing, going back to the hierarchy really quick before I end, is that we need to also recognize that some of our national organizations will have local or regional chapters, and make sure that we leverage those regional presences in the states effectively too. One good example of that is the After School Alliance. The state alliances are very strong in their states, and without them, we probably can't make a lot of traction on a state level. So anyway, and then last, also, Sylvia, I didn't see the link to the matrix in there, but there, she just put it in the chat.
In there. And just so you know, Tammy, everyone's done such a good job. So if you want to, we have about 5 minutes to give folks an opportunity if you want to provide them some broad orientation to the matrix that I put in the chat.
Sure, we can go to that real quick if you want. And I would also like to, put out there that if if you have thoughts around, strengthening this matrix, making it more effective, please let us know. This is by no means, I'm sure Sylvia won't be the last version of it probably.
No.
It's a starting point. So what we've done is in that matrix, and this is something that I think we could use a little bit of help on if people want to think noodle on it, but we've aligned all of the short, mid, and long-term outcomes across the matrix and horizontally. And what we've done is at the next, below that is kind of thought about, well, what do you need to have, expertise or role to support those outcomes? And we just kind of went through and thought about, what kind of attributes, what kind of skills, expertise, interests would or partnering organization need to be able to contribute to the successful accomplishment of those outcomes. And that's in the line 8, yeah. So, and I'm sure that's not exhaustive. There's probably other thoughts that could go into that, but it really is meant to be able to help spark some thoughts around a potential partner to say, have I been involved in collective impact activities in my state? Do I have, where can we play a role in these different outcomes? So that's the matrix. It's very straightforward. We really tried to think about formatting and creating a way in which it could be easily integrated into the full proposal, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to communicate our partnerships in a concise way that uses the least amount of space in the full page limitations, right? So, but any feedback, thoughts around improving it, I'm sure that Sylvia and Nate would be open to any kind of input on that. So.
Thank you, Tammy. No, that's great. We wanted to give you all an opportunity to at least get a broad orientation to the matrix. It is the tool that we'll be using to identify the individuals that want to, at least at this particular point, be named as alliance partners. And so please feel free to complete that. Again, if you're able to look at the matrix and see specific ways in which your organization has expertise and can directly support those outcomes, we want to make sure that we get you in the proposal. And because we are getting close to time in terms of submitting the alliance proposal, we'll reach out by Monday and just check in to see if everyone has had an opportunity to review that. But we certainly welcome you to let us know prior to that. You can directly email me or anyone who's been involved in the project to let us know, and we can go from there. So thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that. That was really excellent. Okay, so I am going to be presenting on behalf of the Backbone Work Group. And yes, thank you to everyone. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this, so thank you. The Backbone Work Group consisted of Zan Black from TIES, Dr. Davis from the Richland School District 2 in South Carolina, Tracy Howard and Brian Mitchell from the Nevada Governor's Office, Mandy Smith from Ohio State University, Harry Snyder, and all the folks, actually there was quite a bit of folks representative from the Great Oaks career campuses in Ohio, and Dr. Wilson from the Maryland State Department of Education. Our charge was to develop a management plan for how NEAP will support the Alliance activities. And you can go to the next slide. And ultimately, our work group questions were really about the who, what, and how of the backbone. How will the backbone support the collaborative change for broadening participation? If you would like to read all of our questions and the resources and responses, we can also share the work group worksheet, which is the document that all the work groups used to start thinking about their work, and then also in the iteration of their responses. So we can put that in the chat here shortly. So one of the things that we looked at is what is it that we need in terms of structure to support the Alliance work. One of the first things that we went to is, you can go on to the next slide. We looked at what does collective impact say about infrastructure. And what it says is that minimally you need to have 3 positions, the project director, the facilitator, and a data manager. The project director is typically the person or people that are dedicated to guiding the vision and the strategy while coordinating advocacy and mobilizing resources. The facilitator is the person that is doing community building and engagement. They're also coordinating aligned activities. And the data manager is the person that is coordinating shared measurement practices that correspond to those aligned activities. Ultimately, the backbone is also thinking about how they are cultivating community engagement and ownership, as well as how we're advancing policy and developing a policy agenda that's impacting larger systems and supports for the goal. And lastly, the backbone is also thinking about how we mobilize resources for sustainability. Now, one of the interesting things that you might notice when we talk about the structure that I'll go into in a second is that NAEP's role is a little bit different. We attended an NSF meeting for the Alliance a couple of weeks ago, where they made it very clear that the backbone needed to have an independent role, and they needed to be able to provide the coordination of activities and administrative support, and that it might be challenging to do that while also still being deeply involved. So frankly, that was a shift for us at NAEP, given the role that we've played within the planning grant. However, we do have a solution for that, and you'll be seeing that we are going to be partnering with an excellent organization where we will share aspects of leadership related to backbone. But another element that we had to take into consideration for backbone is this notion of a regional structure. So what does that look like ultimately in terms of how this work could be shaped? We can go to the next slide. So first, we really looked at our co-PIs as being the individuals that would host regional support for this regional structure. So you'll notice that currently our co-PIs are represented by those stars, and they would provide project directors and managers to help coordinate the work at a regional level. And this would allow NAEP to still provide national leadership for the work. And we can go to the next slide. And we are partnering with RTI International. RTI International is a group that we've been working with for quite some time. And I don't know if Jessica's still here with us. I can't see your face. If you are, Jessica, please feel free to unmute and interrupt me to say hello to everyone. But RTI International and NAEP has been working together for quite some time. They have been a long-term research partner for us, but also have a lot of experience around system building and system level change, specifically around equity work. So we will be able to partner with them, and we'll talk a little bit about what that staffing is going to look like. But the overall structure is exactly what you see here, is that we'll be able to have a management team, a steering committee, the work groups, and the work groups are going to look a little bit different. So we've got leadership and partnership, which is a combination of the 2 work groups right now within the planning grant, that is leadership and communication, and then partnerships. We do also have metrics, data collection, and reporting, again, given the activities that were shared to build equity systems building within STEM and CT in the middle grades. And we also have the asset map building and advocacy and policy work group. all of these different structures will exist within all of the regions. And we can go to the next slide. And so what that's going to translate to in terms of staffing is that, again, the backbone will technically be RTI. They will host a communications manager, a data manager, and a facilitation manager. NAEP will serve as a national hub for this work. So we will still host the project director and a project manager. Our co-PIs will serve to support the regional hubs, with each of them hosting a regional director and manager. And we will continue our partnership with EDC as our evaluator. And we will have an arm of RTI separate from the division that's going to support the backbone work. RTI has a research division that will work alongside our partner, Gay Stewart. I don't know if Gay's still here, from West Virginia University. The beauty of this for the research and that particular partnership is that RTI has a lot of the systems change and system level research experience. And Gay is actually a part of one of the alliances right now and has a lot of depth around the student research questions, which we think also need to be something that is incorporated into the research plan. All right. William, I think you are up.
Cool. So a handful of folks from the leadership and the leadership group. There was probably I probably had the highest degree of inconsistency of managing the group. Just struggled to really figure out what we were actually communicating about. That was something that we wrestled with. We did get some movement, but a lot of what we wrestled with on the next couple slides, you'll see here in a couple seconds, you can move forward, Sylvia, is building leadership capacity, a leadership framework, and a communication plan. Ironically, the notion of leadership around this work already takes into account we are arriving to this grant because we have shared beliefs around the vision already. So it factors in a shared degree of leadership that exists by the folks and the organizations that are participating already. So we know that there's some shared leadership. There might be differences in strategy that we have to work through as the work evolves. But specifically, the one thing we wrestled with the most was the communication plan. So if you keep advancing forward, certain things that we talked about is, what are the communication strategies we're actually asking people to do? Like, what do we want the people that are part of this alliance to be communicating out? What are we asking state departments of ed to communicate out? What do we want policymakers to do regarding their degree of communication? I'm not sure we made any progress on that question, but just figuring out those questions exist are critical to the movement of this project over the next 12 months, the next chapter, or the next iteration of this work. Go to the next slide, Sylvia. We need to make sure that we have a clearly defined set of priorities, which are different than our goals. Like, what are we working on inside of these specific goals so that we can enhance communication and really provide high levels of clarity to the different organizations, the different channels, or the different stakeholders that we wish to engage in this body of work. Something that I personally recognized in the last 6 to 8 months is this work is so broad. We're talking about school districts, we're talking about profits, nonprofits, we're talking about state departments of education, we're talking about policymakers. So to not have a communication plan may be a variable that inhibits growth or progress around this work. You can go to the next one. So we might need to have some professional workshops as a team or some collaborative spaces that are specifically around this is what we're going to communicate in the next 30, 60, 90 days. Right now, most of our professional spaces that we get into, we're attacking all of the channels of this entire body of work. So at some point, we may need to isolate communication as the isolated variable so that people feel empowered. Can I tell my school board about this? What do you want me to tell my school board about this? What should I be communicating to my local policymakers? What are we asking them to do? Because if we don't narrow and fine tune the language in our communication, the weight and the importance of this work might get lost in translation. Go to the next slide, Sylvia. So this is really just simply reflecting on what these four bullet points at the end are talking about is tailoring the communication to who it needs to provide movement around. The bottom bullet point is we also need to get out of email. We can't flood people's emails with memos about this body of work and expect it to work. Like we know right now at every single major media outlet, teachers and administrators are telling large scale school districts and organizations they're overwhelmed. They've had too much. They can't process more information. So we're gonna have to use social media. We're gonna have to use some counter narratives. We're gonna have to use, yes, Tiara, some dope music to engage people and figure out how to appeal to the emotions of people so people can digest what we're trying to communicate. If your inbox is like mine, you're flooded with 99 emails a day from vendors, people that have hacked your email. You don't know if it's legit or not legit. So we just have to be thoughtful about how we communicate and make sure that we're giving people small, bite-sized, digestible pieces of communication that empower people to lead in their organizations. This is a lot of work if you're in it. Like I'm in this work with NAEP, and it's a lot of work for me to know how to communicate. I can only imagine it feels like a lot of work to outsiders that are new to receiving this body of work. And in order to prevent people from getting turned off, we just have to be critically conscious and thoughtful about catering to our educational industry right now, which appears to be on information overload. We just have to be sensitive to it. So appreciate the work of those that were able to chime in along the way. And it's a messy strategy in the communication world. End slide, Sylvia.
Thanks, William. Appreciate that. So I'm going to be also presenting on behalf of the Goals and Metrics Work Group, and we can go on to the next slide. That work group consisted of Carolyn Zachary from California Department of Education, Mimi and myself from NAEP, Ginger Fitzhugh from EDC, Gay Stewart from West Virginia, Ted Kirkpatrick from Great Oaks, Tiara Booker-Dwyer from Maryland State Department of Education, and Pamela Bogdan from California. We can go to the next slide. So our charge was to make sure that we can design ways that success will be measured and reported within the Alliance, specifically looking at how we identify indicators, think through data collection systems, ultimately all in support of ways that we can engage in continuous learning and improvement related to the very system that we seek to impact. We can go to the next slide. The goal of our work, specifically the goal that's listed in our logic model, is that we would be building a national collective impact alliance that would be dedicated to eliminating inequities in STEM and CTE pathways in the middle grades through equity systems building, specifically with local, state, and federal educational partners, so that we can develop and enhance policy, collaboration, and system alignment. And I want to name that this is a big shift And one of the reasons why NSF is really invested in collaboration change models instead of what can you do specifically in direct service of students, right? It's a complete game changer for a lot of folks because oftentimes we're coming together based on our passion to see all of our students succeed. But now this particular work is really looking at what are the tools, the skills, the experiences that we have around effective collaboration to create systems change. And so I want to name that that's not a small thing. And also subsequently, it's not a small thing to think about what that looks like in terms of goals and metrics. We can move on to the next slide. So one of the things that the goals and metrics work group did is we have 2 different drafts of the logic model. This is draft number 2, which Kathleen will drop the link for if you want to access it and take a look at it. This was our second draft logic model that the work group started utilizing in September when we got together. And it walks us through what we actually initially considered as short, mid, and long-term outcomes in support of this goal. And so what the goals and metrics work group did is actually dig a little bit deeper to see where might there be some gaps in what we initially drafted in this logic model. And you can go to the next slide. While we were doing that, we also needed to take into consideration the NSF includes shared measures. So what they're looking at is everything from program participation and the elements that you see listed underneath that. They're also looking at collaborative infrastructure. So once again, this isn't about whether or not NAEP or organization X is doing a good job as an organization, broadening participation in STEM and CTE in the middle grades, but they're actually looking at, so that particular organization, how well does it actually collaborate with other stakeholders that have an impact on broadening participation? So you see there that they have those measures around collaborative infrastructure. And a huge one is actually what's the skill and ability to not just, again, the pieces of collective impact that we named before, right? Developing a shared vision, the partnerships, the leadership and communication, but actually, how is this particular alliance well positioned to think about expansion, growth, sustainability, and scaled impact? That's a very different focus. And again, something that we had to continue to come back to make sure that we were really connecting to what this funder is actually looking for. And then you see the other STEM BP outcomes, which, as I understand it from a conversation with Gay, who's in one of the alliances currently, had a lot to do with what the current alliances or the first alliances were measuring. So there is an opportunity for us to actually offer some additional recommendations that should be included in NSF includes shared measures, because their first invitation was actually not as focused on systems level change. So what we've done is actually heavily focused on systems change because of their shift. And now the goals and metrics piece is just catching up. And again, there's an opportunity to share what we bring to the table, given the work that we've done intentionally around thinking about systems level change. We can go to the next slide. So I don't want to read all of these to you because you will have access to them in the links that Kathleen has provided. But what you will see is that when we talk about equity systems building, what we're really talking about is how do we first get a sense of how do we build capacity within the organizations who are stakeholders in this space, right? The space being the middle grades and those who are interested and want to broaden participation in STEM and CTE in the middle grades. How do we make sure that we understand what are the practices that are occurring right now to really understand what it means to do a self-study, right? Like, how am I performing? How am I being intentional about broadening participation? And of course, the assumption is that, well, isn't everyone doing that? But I think many of you know, no, everyone isn't doing that, right? So a huge part of the value add for us is that we would be able to really invite people to do a self-study around what's the data telling you about your efforts around broadening participation? What are your policies telling you about, again, intentional efforts to broaden participation in the middle grades? And then ultimately being able to build some resources that really address the needs that we learn from those self-studies. You can go to the next slide. These are some of the proposed short and medium term outcomes, which again is really looking at how is it ultimately over time that we are looking at being able to share what are some equity language and frameworks that we can offer to organizations who are wanting to create the system level change to broaden participation. That's going to take quite a bit of time. And another way to think about also what we've outlined in terms of the short, medium, and long term is that, you know, we're talking about a proposal that is over 5 years. But the truth of the matter is that long-term outcomes will likely not be something that we can measure until year 4 or 5. So we do have some of that already outlined in the, you can go back to the presentation, Kathleen. You can see that the different outcomes are outlined, again, from short, mid, and long term. And they are all aligned with our goal to create equity systems building for broadening participation in STEM and CTE in the middle grades. And I think up next is research and evaluation.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I am Ginger Fitzhugh with Education Development Center, and I am going to give a brief, we're in the home stretch with the work group updates. I think we are the last one. The update about the research and evaluation work group. So our charge was to develop 2 things, actually. A rigorous and innovative research design to inform the Alliance's efforts, and also to generate some knowledge that will help inform the general community about ways to broaden participation in STEM and CTE. And the second charge was to design an evaluation plan to measure the Alliance's progress and outcomes. So want to answer the, oh, if you could go back just a second, thank you. Why do we have both research and evaluation? And the short answer to that is because NSF requires it. They expect you to generate some generalizable knowledge, so to have some research studies, as well as to have an evaluation to focus on how the project itself is working and what the outcomes are. So there are various different metaphors that you can think about here, but one of them is kind of an iceberg metaphor, and that with the research and evaluation that we are seeking to understand what happens both above the surface, what you can see, as well as below, and maybe even a little bit some of the surrounding water, because this is very complex when you're talking about systems change, and the context matters too. And I want to acknowledge Gay Stewart is here, and will be leading the research from West Virginia. And Mimi and Sylvia were also on this work group, and then RTI will be joining us soon. So this is the very short version of what roles we will play. So there are actually going to be 2 different research efforts, one led by Gay from West Virginia, and then, as Sylvia mentioned, RTI is also going to have a research role. I will be leading a team from EDC to conduct the evaluation, and we do plan to work very closely together to figure out our roles and how we can complement one another. We may be co-designing some instruments, sharing data, all of that, so that we can try to make this as seamless and as helpful as possible. Next slide. This is the slightly longer version of what the difference is between research and evaluation, and it's a fuzzy line between the two. Really, there is some overlap in their functions. They both are about learning and generating knowledge, but they do have some differences. Research is generally more often about generating new knowledge or understanding that can inform the field more broadly, whereas evaluation is focused more specifically on if and how an initiative is making progress towards its goals. So next slide, and I'm going to do my best to talk a little bit about Gay's plan for the research at this point, and then Gay, feel free to jump in and add or correct anything that I got wrong. So in both the research and evaluation plans, we are still developing them because they need to be reflective of what your plans are for the initiative. But at this point, Gay is planning to focus on how the policy and maybe practice changes that you are aiming to achieve at different levels ultimately impact students' entry to and persistence in STEM career pathways, and to understand what kinds of factors actually make a difference. So that may be looking at things like which particular kinds of policies, school level characteristics. It can also be things at student or family level in terms of socioeconomic variables. And then actually tracking, we're optimistic that we'll be able to track outcomes for students, including things like their participation in various core classes that we know are really critical for entering STEM career pathways, possibly GPA scores. So her research is going to focus on what kinds of things make a difference for students entering STEM and CTE career pathways, and hopefully tracking some of those things longitudinally. And want to acknowledge that those connections will be correlational, not causational, because it's complex. There's lots of things that are going on, obviously, and that can affect things, but still, hopefully, I know Gay has some fabulous research experience and can do all kinds of fancy, rigorous statistical models to help us look at and do a really good job of kind of looking at what makes a difference, we think. Also, the research will be looking at the processes of the Alliance itself. I'm not sure how much that will be in Gay's bailiwick versus RTI. Gay's nodding that will be RTI's research focus. And then the evaluation, you can go to the next slide, which is our last slide, is again going to be focusing more on the Alliance functioning and what the Alliance does itself. And we are going to be using this framework, which is from the Collective Impact Forum, and which has produced some great materials and guides about how do you evaluate collective impact. And these initiatives are incredibly complex and developing. And so a very traditional kind of evaluation approach doesn't make sense of just collecting data at the beginning and the end of did it work. So early on in the initiative, probably the first year or two of the Alliance, we may be doing more developmental evaluation as you're actually beginning to implement some of your ideas, figure out what you need to do and why, and hopefully we can help inform what needs to happen. And then starting in years 2 to 3, we'll shift a bit more towards formative evaluation as you're really getting going with implementing things with your partners, and to see how is what you're doing, how well is it working, what things might need to be tweaked or added. And then summative evaluation will be towards the end of the project in maybe years 4 and 5, where we're actually looking at what difference did it make. And this is where there's going to be more overlap, probably especially with the research. So we'll be figuring exactly what that looks like. I will say for the evaluation, we will be looking both at the level of the functioning of the Alliance itself, how the Alliance, how you all work together, how your structures, what structures you develop and how they work, as well as at the level of influence with policymakers, educators, and students, which is ultimately what you're hoping to achieve. Gay, anything you want to add about the research or our work group?
You did a great job, Jenny. I'm looking forward to working with you.
I think that's it from us.
Thank you all. All right, so I want to give us a big pat on the back because when we were preparing this, I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is like drinking from a fire hose. I hope we give folks all of the important pieces and not too much of the weeds. I think we're okay because we've got quite a bit of time, which is exciting because I think that leaves most of the time for your questions and feedback. I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick wrap up of what the Alliance proposal is going to look like right now in terms of the goals, the activities, and structure. And I just want to remind folks that if you haven't had a chance to provide your feedback, I just put it in the chat again. The Jamboard is providing you with that opportunity, whether it's right now or later on. So to recap everything that's been shared, and again, I just want to thank each and every one of you who not just led the work groups, but also all of you that have contributed. I did get an opportunity to attend some of the work group meetings, and I feel incredibly hopeful and also very encouraged by, I think, the amount of passion that all of us have had around the issue of broadening participation for STEM and CTE in the middle grades. I really appreciate the persistence and your time. As William mentioned earlier, I know everyone is stretched incredibly thin. So showing up to this, I think, is definitely a reflection of our passion for educational equity and for our students. So I just want to thank you for that. And just wrap up with a broad overview of where we are with the Alliance proposal. So as we mentioned earlier, the goal is going to be to create this alliance that's dedicated to eliminating inequities in the STEM and CTE pathways in middle grade. We're going to be doing that by focusing on this notion of what is equity systems building, right? And doing that in partnership with local, state, and federal education partners so that we can develop and enhance policy and collaboration and system alignment. What we understand about systems that are coordinated and that center beneficiaries, in this case, our students and families, in our work and how we operate. When we are aligned, then our students are not falling through the cracks, right? So that's really ultimately what this work is going to be dedicated to. And you've got the activities as listed below in these buckets, right? So we're going to have activities that are in support of really thinking about the leaders that we bring to this, the partners that we bring to this. By the way, not exclusive of our students, families, and community. If you were able to join us this summer, you were able to probably participate in a couple of the meetings where we really talked about what it looks like to incorporate student voice and student leadership, as well as families and community. We're going to be doing work to really make sure that we are gathering data about what exists in the systems right now at a local level, at a state level, at a regional level. What does that tell us about what exists in terms of resources, in terms of what's working and what's not working, and what the needs are? Which then leads us to really thinking about how are we doing asset map building, again, so that we have an opportunity to understand where there are resources to help us achieve this goal and where there are some activities that we need to do in order to build resources that can support this goal. And then lastly, one of the things that we envision is as we are engaging in this research and learning about what's happening in the system, that ultimately a lot of change can occur by communicating the findings, right? Communicating around best practices and what's happening around advocacy and how we're equipping our students and our families and all the stakeholders within the system to really be strong advocates for broadening participation in STEM and CTE. And that also includes, of course, developing policy agenda. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I think, you know, as it relates to the structure, this is, again, where we are looking to lean heavily on our co-PIs, but also our partner organizations. Tammy mentioned that we are looking to develop an MOU, which will borrow largely from that matrix that she shared. And will provide partners with an opportunity to say, this is where I see myself being able to lend expertise as well as staff support in order to accomplish this goal. And we will make it flexible enough, again, where you might have an organization that can actually lend support in a variety of ways that are aligned with those outcomes, or we may have an organization that is just really skilled in one particular area, and that's okay too. We want to make sure that we create a flexible alliance where everyone who's dedicated to this can leverage their resources in support of the overall goal. And then lastly, around structure, we talked about the role again of RTI, EDC, and West Virginia. The other thing I would like to share, and I think she's on here, you will likely, especially if you are clear on wanting to be a partner for the Alliance, you are going to receive some communication from our grant coordination team support extraordinaire, Jennifer Hoff with Sky Strategies. She is going to be helping us to make sure that we put forward the strongest proposal for the Alliance. And so you may get some communication from her. Okay. I now want to open the floor for anyone to share their feedback. Again, it can be in the form of what's resonating for you right now, where you might still have some questions or anything you think would be important for us to consider in the Alliance proposal development, which is due January 25th.
Sylvia, can you clarify the difference between the version 2 and version 3 of the logic models?
Yes. So in version 2, we really spoke very broadly about what does equity systems building really look like for us. Version 3, the goals and metrics work group actually went back to that and said, there are perhaps some midterm outcomes that we've named, and I don't see where there's a clear short-term piece that corresponds to that. So let's fill that in. Any other questions?
You know, and Sylvia, this is Tammy. I just realized I might have had version 2, not version 3.
Oh, it's okay, because version 2, which was just a broader piece, anything that was added to in version 3 is aligned with something that was already in version 2.
Okay, I just want to make sure the matrix was accurate because I was trying to think of making sure I had the right version, but okay, thanks.
Yep. Yes, it'll still work. Yep.
Sylvia, I'm seeing a couple questions that are on the second page of the Jamboard about roles and time commitments for partners.
Oh, wonderful. Ginger, you did that so well. And also, by the way, if this whole evaluation thing doesn't work out, you have a wonderful radio voice because I can't see your face right now. But
I'm glad my headset is hanging in there today.
No, it is. Would you mind reading one of those out to me?
Yes, and I just stuck them in the chat too. What are the defined roles and time commitment for potential partners, collaborators, and how will they be acknowledged for their contributions?
Yes, so the defined roles what we're envisioning is that the matrix that Tammy shared within the partnerships work group, the roles will be an invitation to partners to identify where they think they can directly contribute to that. So it will be in the way of resources. So for example, we can dedicate staff X who has expertise in, let's just say, equity frameworks or systems change work, right? And what we are going to leave right now pretty flexible is the time commitment. But what we're looking for the proposal, actually in the letter of support, you'll have to speak to two pieces that NSF spoke to. So a high level of knowledge of the work, and then a high level of commitment. So if I'm looking at that, what I'm saying is you have to at least participate in 75% of the work group meetings, assuming that your participation is related to an outcome that only ties to one work group. So that's just like an example of what that could look like. But for the purposes of the Alliance, what they're looking for is a letter from partners that, again, will say, yes, I'm very informed about this particular project and we are significantly committing. So that is one of the reasons why the partnership matrix is really important, because sometimes you may be in support of something, but you can't actually provide or lend any staff to it. In which case, if you go back and look at what they're talking about, a sustainable alliance, we can't sustain the work without people. And then the second question, I think, is how will they be acknowledged for their contributions? I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, because that can look like so many different things, right? So that can look like how someone may want to be named in specific products that come out of the Alliance. That can look like leadership roles. So I don't know if someone wants to unmute and talk some more about that, but it's a good question.
Hey, Sylvia, that was my question. I'm actually on the partners group, but a lot of companies, big or small, they want to know what's in it for them, long term. So I guess, if that question was to come up in a roundabout way, just how we would be able to intelligently answer that.
Yeah, I think there's flexibility for each organization to name what's important to them. That doesn't mean there's a guarantee that we'll be able to meet everyone's need in terms of how they want to be acknowledged. But there is nothing currently in the proposal that has me feeling like, well, there's only one specific way in which you could be acknowledged.
Thank you.
Sure. And if you have recommendations around that, I definitely welcome you to please include that in the Jamboard slide around recommendations, things that you think would be important.
Sylvia, this is Tammy. Jeanette kind of sparked a thought in my brain too around, as an alliance, and I might have missed this and I apologize, but kind of coming together as an alliance to create a unified communication strategy for advocacy and helping people understand why this is important. I mean, our effectiveness will be reflected in our ability to communicate, to our policymakers, to our legislators, why we're doing this, and having one component of what we do be around more effective communication strategies. And it's probably all right there in the logic model, and I completely spaced it because it's been a while since I really looked at it. But I think Jeanette kind of hit on that idea of a unified communication strategy.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, because it helps us to unpack how we come to the term advocacy is so different, depending on, your own experience. But part of the communication plan I envision is us being able to have what I'll call an elevator speech, right? Where we can talk about, first and foremost, like, why are we doing this work? What's the problem? What's the need out there? And to me, that's the first part of the education, right? That we need to kind of take on the road. Is right now the assumption is that everyone knows that there is this issue with regard to equal opportunity and access for STEM and CTE in the middle grades, right? So that's the assumption. But part of the advocacy is educating folks on the fact that, hey, this is an issue. Let me show you all the ways that it's an issue, both in terms of the moral imperative as well as the workforce and economic imperative. And then being able to have a communication plan that, again, leverages what is it that we're learning through our activities around data gathering, data sharing, metrics, right? What are we learning about what's working, what's not working? So that ultimately, when you develop a policy agenda, and that is a part of the communication plan, you've got all of these different pieces that are incorporated that we can actually develop into, a toolkit of sorts that all of the stakeholders can access, whether you're talking about a student or a community member or a family member that is interested in really helping us to really broaden the participation in STEM and CTE in the middle grades. So I imagine that when we pull all of this together, our communication plan will not just be about how are we organizing ourselves to do this work, but it should also include what is it that we're learning through these activities and how are we kind of taking that show on the road so that we can make people aware of the need for this, the importance for this, and then again, how do you create the change, ultimately leveraging resources and policy.
Thanks. That really clarifies. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Sure. Any other questions or thoughts? Those are all really good, by the way. You all are really quiet, so that means we either did a phenomenal job or we overwhelmed you and you are tired now.
All
I
the
see you
above. All the above.
unmuting.
All the above.
No, it is a lot of information to process. So I can totally appreciate that. And those of us who've been working on this for some time, we've had a lot of intimate time with this information to process it. So I appreciate everyone being here today. I appreciate the questions and the engagement. And most of all, I really just appreciate the collaboration. I think sometimes that can be taken for granted, but collaboration is not easy. And then creating collaboration around national systems change is no small feat. So, pat yourselves on the back. This has been a lot of work and really good, thoughtful work. So thank you all. I don't believe we need to stay on for anything else other than to share with you all that the next steering committee meeting is on December 17th. And because we are really down to the wire, likely that's going to be an update on where we are with the details of the proposal. I do welcome anyone that wants to participate in that, even if you're not on the steering committee. Please reach out to Kathleen or I and just let us know, and we'd be happy to invite you into that. Again, just to keep you involved and aware of where we are. If you are interested in being considered as an alliance partner, I ask that you please reach out to Kathleen or I as soon as possible and definitely complete that partnership matrix document because we are looking to send out those letters of support. Jennifer Hoff, Jennifer, if you want to wave, say hi to everyone. She and I will be working on that hopefully in the next few days to get something out, pro forma letters, so that folks can do what they need to do and engage the leadership that they need to engage to get those done in a timely fashion, especially with the holidays coming up. So that is all that we have. And again, just want to thank all of you for your hard work and all of your contributions. Have a great holiday season.
You too. Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.